When an avoidant goes cold, it's not because they feel less, it's because they feel too much. To someone who experiences connection through closeness, emotional distance immediately registers as rejection. It feels personal, intentional, even cruel. But for an avoidant, distance isn't a message being sent to you, it's a system response happening inside them. The moment real attachment begins to form, their nervous system doesn't interpret it as romance or safety. It interprets it as risk. Emotional closeness triggers old survival wiring that learned long ago that needing someone came with a cost. So instead of leaning in, their body braces. Pulling back becomes the fastest way to regain equilibrium, not because you overwhelm them, but because the intensity of caring activated something they don't know how to soothe in real time. Avoidants are not wired to regulate emotion through connection. They regulate through separation, where others calm down by talking, bonding, or receiving reassurance. Avoidants calm down by creating space. That space gives them the illusion of control over feelings that otherwise feel invasive and destabilizing. This is why the shift often feels sudden. One moment there is warmth, presence, even vulnerability, and the next there is distance, silence, or emotional flatness. That switch isn't strategic, it's reflexive. Their system is trying to contain an emotional surge that feels bigger than their capacity to hold. Coldness becomes a lid. Silence becomes a pause button. It's not a withdrawal of care, it's a method of emotional compression. What makes this dynamic so confusing is that the behavior contradicts the feeling. The more meaningful you become, the more regulation they need. If you were insignificant, there would be nothing to manage. Indifference doesn't require effort. It doesn't demand space, boundaries, or emotional shutdown. You don't armor yourself against something that doesn't matter. Distance only shows up when something inside them is activated and unresolved. And that activation often comes from the exact things people associate with love: consistency, emotional safety, being seen, being understood. These aren't neutral experiences for an avoidant, they're destabilizing ones. So when they go cold, it's not a statement about your value. It's a sign their internal system is overloaded. They're not punishing you. They're not trying to gain leverage. They're trying to slow down a feeling that arrived faster and deeper than they expected. This is why pressure makes things worse. Demands for clarity, reassurance, or closeness increase the emotional intensity they're already struggling to regulate. Distance becomes the only tool they know how to use. Understanding this changes how you interpret their behavior. Coldness is not the opposite of attachment. It's what attachment looks like in a system trained to survive without depending on anyone. Silence is not emptiness. It's containment. And the need for space is not a lack of interest. It's proof that something inside them mattered enough to disrupt their internal balance. Avoidants don't shut down with people they feel nothing for. They shut down with the ones who could change them. This is one of the most misunderstood patterns in avoidant attachment, because from the outside, withdrawal looks like loss of interest. But in reality, avoidants are often most relaxed with people they don't care deeply about. Casual connections don't threaten their sense of self. Surface level interactions don't demand vulnerability, emotional availability, or internal reorganization. There is nothing to lose, so there is nothing to protect. The moment someone becomes emotionally relevant, however, the dynamic shifts. Importance activates defenses, meaning triggers alarm. What flips the switch isn't conflict or boredom, it's closeness. Avoidants typically don't pull away at the beginning, they pull away after intimacy, after shared moments, after emotional openness, after a sense of rhythm and consistency has formed. That timing is not accidental. Emotional significance destabilizes the emotional architecture they've relied on for safety. When someone starts to matter, their nervous system interprets that bond as a potential loss of autonomy, not a gain in connection. Their internal world begins to reorganize around another person, and that feels dangerous to a system built on self-reliance. This is why avoidant withdrawal often feels confusingly out of sync. Just when things seem secure, they become distant. Just when you relax, they retreat. Not because something went wrong, but because something went right. Emotional closeness crosses a threshold where the relationship stops feeling optional and starts feeling impactful. And impact is exactly what avoidants fear, because impact means influence, and influence means vulnerability. If you can affect them, you can also hurt them. So their system does what it learned to do early on: reduce exposure by creating distance. It's important to understand that this withdrawal isn't conscious sabotage. Avoidants are not sitting there deciding to push you away. Their body makes the decision before their mind catches up. They feel an internal tightening, a need to breathe, a sense that something is moving too fast or too deep. Retreat becomes regulation. Pulling back restores the familiar feeling of independence that once kept them emotionally safe. Love didn't disappear. It became real enough to threaten their emotional equilibrium. If they truly didn't care, the pattern would look different. There wouldn't be hesitation, oscillation, or internal conflict. There would be detachment. Disinterest is clean. Withdrawal driven by attachment is messy, inconsistent, and emotionally charged. The fact that they distance after closeness, not before, is the proof. You didn't imagine the connection. You didn't misread the bond. You simply touched a depth that activated a system trained to survive without needing anyone. Distance is how avoidants stay powerful in a situation they secretly can't stop thinking about. For an avoidant, emotional attachment doesn't feel like closeness. It feels like loss of control. The moment they sense themselves becoming emotionally invested, their nervous system reacts with urgency, not because they dislike you, but because attachment introduces dependence, and dependence threatens the identity they've built around self-sufficiency. Loneliness feels familiar. Emotional reliance does not. So when attachment starts to form, they instinctively reach for the one tool that has always restored balance: distance. Avoidance fear emotional dependence more than isolation. Being alone feels manageable. Being emotionally tied to someone else feels unpredictable. Attachment means your mood can affect theirs, your absence can unsettle them, and your expectations might require emotional labor. They were never taught how to provide. That loss of internal sovereignty is what they resist. Coldness becomes a boundary, not against you, but against the feeling of being emotionally pulled towards someone in a way they can't control. By withdrawing, they reclaim a sense of authority over their inner world. What's often misunderstood is that cold behavior doesn't mean mental absence. In fact, it's often the opposite. Avoidants don't detach cleanly when attachment is present. They ruminate, they replay conversations, they analyze your tone, your timing, your reaction. They wonder what you felt, what you noticed, what you might expect next. They think about how close things got and whether that closeness changed the dynamic permanently. The coldness you experience on the outside is often paired with mental noise on the inside. Distance isn't forgetfulness, it's containment. Pulling away gives them the illusion of autonomy. When they don't respond immediately, when they become emotionally flat, when they reduce contact, it helps them feel like they are back in control of the pace and intensity. That sense of control is soothing to an avoidant nervous system. It tells them they're not trapped, not dependent, not losing themselves. Even if you occupy their thoughts, the physical and emotional distance helps them convince themselves they're still independent. The contradiction is the proof. You matter enough to think about, but not enough yet to feel safe expressing it. This is why avoidant coldness often intensifies when feelings deepen. The more attached they become, the more they need to reassert control. If they truly didn't care, there would be no internal struggle to manage. They wouldn't need to regulate, analyze, or create space. Indifference requires no strategy. Coldness does. It's a defensive move designed to keep attachment from tipping into dependence. And understanding this shifts the narrative. Their distance isn't a power move over you. It's a power move over feelings they haven't learned how to hold. You don't armor yourself against something that doesn't matter. This is the key distinction most people miss when interpreting avoidant behavior. True disinterest is loose, unguarded, and effortless. When someone genuinely doesn't care, there's no tension in their responses, no calculation in their timing, no emotional flatness being maintained. Avoidant coldness, on the other hand, is structured. It's deliberate, restrained, and energetically tight. Short replies, delayed responses, minimal emotional expression. These aren't neutral behaviors. They are protective ones. And protection only activates when the system senses emotional exposure. An avoidance nervous system doesn't shut down because there's nothing to feel. It shuts down because there's too much to feel and no safe channel to express it. On the surface, they may look calm, distant, or indifferent, but internally, their body is working overtime to suppress emotional activation. That's why the behavior often feels stiff rather than detached. There's a sense of holding back, of monitoring themselves, of keeping emotional leakage to a minimum. They're not relaxed, they're regulated, and regulation takes effort. If you pay attention, the signs are subtle but consistent. The replies aren't just short, they're controlled. The silence isn't peaceful, it's guarded. The emotional flatness isn't natural, it's maintained. These are containment strategies. Their system is saying, if I stay neutral, I stay safe. The irony is that neutrality requires constant vigilance when emotion is present underneath. The colder they appear, the more internal pressure they're managing. You don't build walls unless something inside you feels exposed. This is why avoidant coldness often shows up alongside inconsistency. One moment there's warmth, humor, or depth, and the next, distance. That fluctuation isn't random. It reflects the push and pull between emotional activation and self-protection. When feelings rise, defenses follow. When they feel too seen, too connected, or too impacted, their body responds by tightening the emotional perimeter. Coldness becomes armor. Silence becomes insulation. If they were truly unbothered, their body wouldn't need to do any of this. There would be no effort to suppress, no need to manage, no internal negotiation. Disinterest doesn't require boundaries. Indifference doesn't require emotional discipline. The presence of defensive behavior is the evidence. Their system is reacting because something matters, something registered as important enough to threaten equilibrium. Understanding this reframes the entire experience. Their coldness isn't a verdict on your worth or the connection's validity. It's a snapshot of a nervous system under strain, trying to protect itself from feelings it doesn't know how to hold safely. The distance isn't emptiness, it's pressure being contained, and the more intense the containment, the more powerful the emotion underneath it usually is. Avoidants don't process love out loud. They process it alone, on repeat. Where other attachment styles externalize emotion through communication, reassurance, and shared vulnerability, avoidants turn inward. Their emotional world is private by necessity, not choice. Expressing longing feels risky because it reveals dependence, and dependence threatens the self-protective structure they've built around autonomy. So instead of saying they miss you, they think about you. Instead of reaching out, their silence isn't empty, it's crowded with internal dialogue. Avoidants don't express longing through consistent messages or emotional affirmations. They express it through rumination. They replay moments that mattered. They analyze what was said, what wasn't, what changed the dynamic. They revisit your tone, your expressions, your reactions. They imagine conversations they'll never initiate, how they might explain themselves, what they'd say if they felt safe, how you'd respond if they were more open. These internal rehearsals happen quietly, often late at night or during moments of emotional vulnerability. They rarely share with anyone. What makes this especially confusing is the disconnect between their internal experience and their external behavior. From the outside, it looks like detachment, but internally, thinking about you becomes a loop, a private ritual they don't interrupt because it's safer than action. Missing you silently feels less dangerous than admitting it out loud. Reaching out risks rejection, emotional obligation, or exposure. Thinking stays contained. Action feels irreversible. So they choose the path that preserves control, even if it prolongs longing. Avoidants also bargain internally. They tell themselves they're fine. They minimize the connection. They rationalize the distance. At the same time, they check for signs of you emotionally moving on. They wonder whether you noticed their absence. They oscillate between wanting closeness and needing space. This internal push and pull is exhausting, which is why they appear emotionally flat. Not because nothing is happening, but because so much is happening beneath the surface. Admitting they miss you would mean admitting attachment. An attachment, for an avoidant, feels like exposure. It means acknowledging that someone has emotional access to them, that someone matters enough to affect their internal state. That realization threatens the independence they rely on to feel safe. So they keep it private. They feel deeply without broadcasting it. They care without performing it. Understanding this changes how you read the silence. Lack of expression is not lack of feeling. For avoidance, love is not something they announce, it's something they manage internally. Their quiet isn't absence, it's restraint. And often, the people they appear least expressive about are the ones occupying the most space in their private emotional world. What looks like indifference is actually two forces colliding: connection versus self protection. Avoidants are rarely confused about you as a person. They often see you clearly, feel the pull, and recognize the emotional significance. What confuses them is what being close to you awakens inside their body. One part of them wants intimacy, resonance, and shared space. Another part wants safety through distance, control, and emotional self-containment. These two forces exist at the same time, and because they've never learned how to integrate them, the result is oscillation. This is why their behavior can feel so inconsistent. Warmth followed by coldness, engagement followed by silence, vulnerability followed by emotional shutdown. It's not because they're playing games or trying to manipulate the dynamic. It's because each time closeness increases, fear activates. And each time fear activates, distance becomes necessary to restore internal safety. Their system doesn't know how to hold desire without immediately scanning for threat. So instead of choosing one direction, they move back and forth between both. Desire pulls them toward you because connection feels good, grounding, and meaningful. Fear pulls them away because closeness feels destabilizing and unfamiliar. For an avoidant, love isn't just attraction, it's exposure. It means being seen, being affected, and potentially being needed. That level of emotional interdependence conflicts with the self-reliance they learned to survive. So when desire rises, fear follows closely behind, whispering that they're losing control, losing space, or losing themselves. This internal tug of war is exhausting. They may crave your presence one day and feel overwhelmed by it the next. They may miss you deeply, then suddenly feel the urge to disappear. Each shift is their nervous system trying to resolve the conflict by swinging toward whichever side feels safer in the moment. Closeness brings comfort, but triggers fear. Distance brings relief, but triggers longing. So they oscillate, not because they don't care, but because caring activates opposing needs they've never reconciled. The more meaningful you are, the stronger this conflict becomes. Shallow connections don't create this level of internal tension. Only emotionally significant bonds do. You don't trigger this pattern because you're doing something wrong. You trigger it because you matter enough to activate both desire and fear simultaneously. That's why the dynamic intensifies as the connection deepens. Understanding this reframes their distance. It's not a verdict on the connection's validity. It's evidence of an unresolved attachment pattern colliding with genuine emotional pull. Their withdrawal isn't the absence of desire. It's desire hitting a nervous system that equates closeness with risk. And until that conflict is resolved internally, distance will remain the temporary solution they reach for whenever connection feels too real. Avoidants don't fear love itself. They fear what love once cost them. Long before you entered their life, love was associated with something painful, overwhelming, or destabilizing. It may have meant losing autonomy, carrying emotional weight too heavy for them, or being abandoned at a moment of vulnerability. Whatever the origin, their nervous system learned a specific lesson. Closeness is dangerous. So when love appears again in adulthood, their body reacts as if the past is happening now. Logic doesn't lead the response. Memory does. For avoidance, love isn't a blank slate. It's layered with unresolved experiences that never fully healed. Emotional intimacy doesn't just feel intense. It feels familiar in the wrong way. It mirrors a time when needing someone led to disappointment, intrusion, or emotional collapse. So when they begin to care deeply, their system doesn't register excitement, it registers threat. The sensation isn't "I'm falling in love," it's "I'm losing control." And the body responds instantly, often before they can even name what they're feeling. This is why distance becomes reflexive. There's no planning involved, no conscious decision to pull away. The moment emotional closeness crosses a certain threshold, their system defaults to protection. Withdrawal becomes automatic. Silence feels safer than expression. Coldness feels safer than vulnerability. These behaviors aren't chosen to hurt you. They're chosen to prevent emotional overwhelm. Their body is trying to avoid reopening a wound it never learned how to soothe. Paradoxically, the person triggering this response is usually the one they care about most. Casual connections don't activate this wound. Only meaningful bonds do. Only the relationships that touch the core of attachment bring the old fear to the surface. That's why the distance can feel so personal and confusing. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the defense. The closer you get, the louder the alarm sounds. This doesn't mean the love is unhealthy or doomed. It means the attachment wound is unresolved. Avoidants aren't afraid of connection. In theory, they're afraid of the emotional consequences they once endured. Their nervous system is trying to prevent history from repeating itself, even if the present is different. So they protect themselves in the only way they know how, by creating space. Understanding this shifts the story. Their withdrawal isn't proof that love isn't there, it's proof that love reached a place that was never repaired. The distance isn't rejection, it's an old survival response resurfacing in a new relationship. And the fact that you triggered it doesn't mean you're the problem. It means you mattered enough to touch something they've been guarding for a very long time. Avoidants don't go cold for strangers, they vanish. This distinction is critical because it separates true disinterest from avoidant deactivation. When an avoidant genuinely doesn't care, the exit is clean. There's no emotional residue, no lingering presence, no half connection. They detach quickly, decisively, and without internal friction. Silence in that case is empty, but when they go cold instead of disappearing, something very different is happening. Coldness is not absence. It's distance with tension still attached. There's a fundamental difference between disengagement and deactivation. Disengagement is emotionally neutral. It doesn't require strategy or regulation. It's calm, consistent, and final. Deactivation, on the other hand, is emotionally charged. It unfolds gradually. Response is slow instead of stopping. Warmth fades instead of ending. The connection remains technically intact, but energetically restrained. This is the hallmark of avoidant attachment under pressure. Their system isn't letting go, it's trying to downregulate without severing the bond entirely. Coldness means they're still emotionally orbiting you. Even if they're physically absent or verbally distant, the attachment hasn't dissolved. You still register internally. You still influence their emotional state. That's why the behavior feels tense rather than detached. They're monitoring themselves, moderating their responses, deciding how much access feels safe. If you didn't matter, there would be no need for any of this. They wouldn't think twice. They wouldn't regulate. They would simply. This is why avoidant coldness often includes inconsistency, a random check-in, a delayed reply that still carries emotional awareness, a subtle acknowledgement that keeps the thread alive. These aren't accidents. They're signs of unresolved attachment. Their system is torn between holding on and pulling back. Coldness becomes the compromise, enough distance to feel safe, enough connection to avoid loss. When someone is irrelevant, there is no oscillation. There's no emotional management. Avoidants don't linger where they feel nothing. They disengage completely because there's nothing to protect or suppress. The presence of cold behavior is the evidence that something inside them is still active, still unresolved, still attached. Understanding this reframes the silence. It's not the end of the story, it's the middle of an internal process. Coldness isn't closure, it's hesitation. It's a nervous system trying to maintain control without cutting ties. And while that can feel painful and confusing on the outside, it carries an important truth. You mattered enough to trigger deactivation instead of disappearance. That doesn't mean you should wait, chase, or interpret coldness as an invitation. But it does mean the connection wasn't imaginary. You didn't misread the bond. Avoidants vanish from what doesn't matter. They only go cold when something still has emotional weight, when the attachment is present but unsafe to fully engage. Coldness isn't the absence of love. It's love hitting a system that doesn't know how to hold it. Avoidants are often misunderstood because their external behavior seems to contradict their internal experience. When they pull away, it's easy to assume that love has disappeared, that care has faded, or that the connection is over. But in reality, distance is rarely the end of attachment. It is a defense mechanism, a nervous system response to emotional activation that feels too intense. or unfamiliar. Their withdrawal is not a statement about you. It's a statement about their capacity to manage emotion. When you understand avoidant psychology, the first shift is seeing distance not as rejection, but as protection. Avoidants have learned, often unconsciously, that closeness carries risk. Intimacy, consistency, and emotional depth can trigger feelings of vulnerability they are not yet equipped to process. When you experience coldness, it is the system saying, I feel something too strongly and I need space to survive it. Their pullback is regulatory, not punitive. They are not choosing to care less. They are choosing to contain what they cannot safely express. The paradox of avoidant attachment is that the more emotionally significant the connection, the more intense the withdrawal can feel. Yet, this intensity is proof of attachment, not absence. The more invested they become internally, the more their nervous system struggles to reconcile desire with protection. Coldness is the compromise. Enough distance to feel safe, enough attention to stay tethered. This creates the illusion of ambivalence. But beneath the surface, care is present, just inaccessible in conventional forms. Ironically, the way you respond can determine how quickly that care becomes accessible. Pressure, chasing, or demanding emotional output often escalates their internal alarm. It intensifies the perception of threat, prompting deeper withdrawal. Conversely, when you maintain stability, calm, and security, their system begins to learn that closeness does not always equal danger. Over time, consistency from you can create a new template in which love feels safe, manageable, and even desirable. Your grounded presence becomes the environment in which attachment can eventually be expressed without triggering overwhelming fear. Understanding this reframes their distance entirely. Distance is not a verdict on your value. It is not a reflection of the connection's authenticity. It is a signal from a nervous system learning to protect itself from intensity it cannot yet regulate. The more you resist personalizing the withdrawal, the less friction the avoidant experiences, and the more room there is for genuine connection to emerge naturally. Distance, in this sense, is not the end. It is their body's way of saying, I care, but I'm not ready to show it safely. And when approached with patience, awareness, and emotional consistency, that defense gradually softens, allowing the love that triggered it to finally be experienced openly.